So that's the slide number one. And apparently, there's a lot of confusion the way we think about the circular economy today, or the degrowth society. It is definitely not the way it was earlier. Primarily, there's a lot of way there is apparent confusion comes. What do you mean by degrowth society? Uh, or it sounds very similar to a green economy or a green society. There are also some lot of equivalent term, slow economy. So where this is, and this is where it is better to really have a good understanding of what it is, because it's going to be a part of our political economy, the way we organize the resources and the societies. So the policy growth of this degrowth actually include the way we reduce the environmental impact of the human activities. And then there is wealth, there is income, how we need to redistribute this within our societies, between societies, one country and the other country. At the same time, we are actually encouraging a shift from a very materialistic value to a very convivial and a very participatory society. And this is where it has to be understood, that now it has expanded and has become a very multi-layered concept, as we try to uh, locate it in the space of capitalism, a very productivism society, where utilitarianisms, post-colonialisms, and society has many forms, matriarchal, patriarchal, societal forms. So, it's some sort of becomes a kind of very, very interesting, and how it is extremely important to really understand this, the way our obsession with the GDP, and that we think that's the only way to measure it. But probably that is not that we have realized from the way this political economy has operated. Certainly, it is not where it is today. So there is an apparent disillusionment with GDP now. And that's where the concept of the decoupling comes, that I will discuss as we go along with this. So what we need to argue is that the unitary focus on a growth causes a very wide spread damage of the ecology. So the economical damage and the unnecessary noise that we create, the necessary noise we need to create for increasing the human living standards. So I try to run through an abstract which I really published, and if you have read out our program details, that certainly carries my synopsis, which actually try to explore a strategic distinction between the growing slow movement and the honest political, economic, and social movement of degrowth. So while the perfunctory analysis might conflate these concepts, degrowth is rigorously defined as a set of critical theories opposing the conventional paradigm of economic growth. And this seems to be a little bit of kind of a very jargon-ridden definition. But what I mean to say is that it has to be posited in the way the capitalist economy is driven by an inherent developmental imperatives. And that necessitate a very radical reduction in the global consumptions and production. This is where we try to bring in the argument of social metabolism in order to achieve a very socially just and ecologically sustainable societal architecture. So the core objective of the degrowth is to redefine prosperity, and not the way that we conceive prosperity is. That is where we talk about nowadays more about the mental well-being. Okay, prioritizing sufficiency, well-being, ecological harmony over the mad accumulation of the wealth or amassing wealth and living life to the excess. So although a consequential reduction in the GDP is anticipated in a degrowth society, this financial shrinkage is a symptom, not a primary goal, which lies in the cultivating the autonomy, care work, community resilience, and conviviality. Now, crucially, what we leverage the concept of a social metabolism, which models the material and the energy flows between society and nature as a diagnostic tool. So the current linear take, make, dispose approach must transform to a very regenerative and circular practices to successfully reverse this metabolism. And strategies for this reversal include strengthening the local economies. We always talk about that, but we never do this. How to strengthen? We think that local economy can be strengthened from outside. Not really. How the villages used to exist all by themselves. And incentivizing the resource productivity, promoting the ethical consumptions, fundamentally challenging the dominant productivist logic. So ultimately, what we endeavor to determine whether a slow economy or a fully realized degrowth framework offers a more viable pathway for humanity to escape the current cycles of resource depletions and overconsumptions. So if you go to the slide 2, the next one, and that primarily talks about where I would talk about the aims and objectives. The aims is, of course, which I touched upon, that we need to move beyond the superficial nomenclature to establish what a degrowth economy is, and the strategic delineations between the socio-cultural phenomena known as the slow movement, which is started, you would know, as a food slow movement, slow food, which is started in Italy by Petrini. That's in 80s. And the profound political, economic, and ecological framework of the degrowth. So the objectives that we like to touch upon, and this is important, that we need a kind of a very, very conceptual and rigorous separations. We need to understand what the boundaries are. How do you demarcate the boundaries between a very lifestyle-focused slow economy and a systematic restructure demanded by a degrowth society? Then the second part is to understand how these biophysical diagnoses can take place to apply a social metabolism framework using the principles derived from a particular model. I call it Musia Sims, which I would explain it as we go along with these presentations to quantify the inherent sustainability of the current growth-centric take, make, and dispose paradigm. So the critique of this composition is to synthesize the classical and neoclassical theories. And we have not really even ignored the Marx. No matter how many of you really think that Marx doesn't exist. Not that I really making a case for Marx to become a devil's advocate. But there are some things that which are still relevant, and Skumter, Solo. So these are people who demonstrate the institutional necessity for the growth of imperative and the resulting social instability that makes degrowth really challenging. Finally, the viability assessment to determine whether a pure lifestyle-driven transitions or a complete degrowth policy framework offers a more viable and robust pathways towards achieving the social equity and ecological sustainability. If you go to the slide 3, the next one, which is so if you really can go to slide 3, and the slide 3, yeah, it is. I've titled those slides just to make sure that none of us actually, even I personally, should not lose count of these slides. Where I primarily talk about the economic paradigm in this background, the current global economic paradigm that is predicated on a very singular foundational assumptions, continuous exponential economic growth. And of course, I'm sure that with AI, you will get a lot of this, something, a kind of growth which you cannot imagine. I don't know where you will go in terms of creating an egalitarian and equitable society. No one had an idea. Professor Jeffrey Hinton, who unleashed this monster called the AI, he even would not have an idea. So for decades, this GDP, which has served as a very undisputed indicator of a national well-being and success, deeply embedding the notion of expansion into the fiscal policy and social welfare planning and political legitimacy, this has to be challenged. So this unwavering commitment to growth, often termed as the growth imperative, growth for growth's sake, now this is very important, is encountering the profound and seemingly insurmountable biophysical constraints. Seeing the stage is one
Professor sir,
critical.
Professor sir.
Yeah.
So do you have your time? I think for this
Yes.
also the 12 minutes limit there.
No, I'll tell you when the slides need to be flipped. I'm giving my 25 minutes
Yeah,
stipulated
okay.
time. Yeah. So
Achha.
don't worry. I'll live and die within that 25 minute stipulation. So
Okay, sir. Thank you.
yeah. So this is what it is, and this is I'm trying. That's why I wanted it to be a little more interactive. So we keep on interrupting me if you like, because I wanted it to be a little more conversation because I very passionately believe in this. So what we do degrowth is that uh, you are situated within a context of escalating the ecological crisis and intellectual necessity of developing a post-growth economic models beyond GDP, beyond PPP, even purchase power parity theory, and beyond a lot of similar models. Uh, Maybe something that we probably try to, maybe some of this would resonate with the idea of a gross national happiness in a compass. So the background is fundamentally defined by a tension between these two conflicting realities: the economic compulsion for the growth and your ecological reality of finitude. Resources are finite. No matter how we get persuaded, whatever way it is, resources are always going to be finite. And from that premise, I say that okay, uh, we must make way for this ecological counter movement, which is called a degrowth society, in a response to this unsustainable productivism, which has two distinct movements that have emerged. Uh, and from this, it has emerged. One is, of course, growth, and the slow movement. Now, slow movement, as I explained to you, Petrini's 80s, which is rooted in a more cultural reaction against an accelerating pace of modern life. And we talk almost everything today: slow food, slow travel, slow religion, slow parenting. Everything is now, each has become a movement. The slow television, which is experimented in Norway, and the British even television adopted it in some format. It was not really that exciting as it could hold a lot of people in the Scandinavian country. So it focuses primarily on individual lifestyle choices, mindfulness, and intention reduction of the pace. Okay, now however, the more radical and systemic challenges come from degrowth. Degrowth is actually an ecological economics framework which critiques the entire foundations of productivism, arguing that the only path to socially just and ecologically stable society is through a planned, managed contraction of the social metabolism. Now, social metabolism, which is the material and energy flows between the society and the nature, is currently a very linear and extractive. You take, make, and dispose. So this is where I thought that a lot of justification for this research lies. What I say primarily is that we need to rigorously and strategically separate these conjoined twins, degrowth from slow movement, slow economy, we call it, using the tools like the Museum framework to ground the degrowth argument is irrefutable, and it is biophysical analysis, thereby redefining the prosperity eye from pivoting from the GDP and the established norm thereof. So the key theoretical framework and concepts here is that we need to have is very important to have a very creative destruction, which is linking the innovation and cyclical farm survival developed by Joseph Scumter. A lot of you must be following him. And the second is, of course, degrowth and social metabolism. This framework used for a material and energy flow analysis in the society. And it has many exponents like Habermas and the Kowalski's. And then you have a growth imperative, the concept that describes the systemic compulsions for the continuous growth within the capitalist economies. Then we have, of course, the Keynes and Ramsey's rule. We say that, okay, economic theory defined the optimal rate of savings, consumptions, primarily derived from the work of the great John Maynard Keynes and the Frank Ramsey. So the multi-scale integrated analysis of social metabolism, which I said MUSSM, tool is actually for the biophysical system analysis. Then you have neoclassical economics. They are also weighing into this argument, where we primarily trying to deal with an economist called Robert Solow with his model of economic growth without necessitating a compulsory growth imperative. Then we have Onken's law, which is primarily dealing with an empirical relationship established by Arthur Onken's relevant rates to the changes in a country's GDP. Okay, finally, we have the Raghuram Rajan, the former chief economist of the World Bank and currently teaching at the US universities, who primarily his theory of economic analysis concerning the dependency of the economic systems, primarily talking about the pensions and stipulated economic growth related political premises. If you go to the next slide, this slide 4, it is also titled, is that we primarily try to talk about a kind of a critique of the growth imperatives. Now, what does it mean is that the core inquiry actually controls a very pervasive growth imperative. And that concept is rooted in a critical political economy, which is Marx propounded, that the capitalism possesses an inherent systematic compulsion for perpetual economic expansions. Those who do not like him, I probably would like to counter him with the prevailing neoclassical growth models, which Solow propounded, which generally deny such a compulsive imperative, framing growth merely as a question of utility maximizations and intemporal decision making, which seconded by the Keynes and Ramsey. So we try to incorporate all these views and see that what kind of conflicting situations it does create in hand. In terms of Skumta's creative destruction, where the firms must constantly innovate and invest to survive, and the social dependencies established by the Okun's law, and the political promises Rajan holds, which I mentioned about the pension fund, which link the employment and the pension viability directly to the GDP growth. So the dependency creates a compelling argument that the current economic architecture is politically and socially unstable without continuous expansions. So what is the disconnect? And this is very important from the social metabolism point of view, is that the framework that we talk about is indispensable for moving a debate beyond purely financial metrics like GDP. So social metabolism models the unsustainable material and energy flows between the society and nature, illustrating how the linear take, make, and dispose system is ecologically self-defeating. So finally the delimiting degrowth and this slow movement, where we need to say that the cultural lifestyle focused slow movement, though it has come from, it is not merely about slow economy, but it represents a very deep-seated critique against productivism, demanding a strategically managed contraction of the social metabolism to achieve a defined non-economic goals of such as conviviality, autonomy, self-sufficiency. So this distinction situates degrowth as a radical proposal to the systemic social restructuring rather than a voluntary consumer choice. The next slide, if you see, primarily, I just very quickly run through the slide 5, which is primarily talk about the methodology, and that is about primarily employing a very interdisciplinary approach, and that integrates the political economy, ecological economics, and social theory. So we go into a lot of empirical data collections, but rather on a very rigorous synthesis and critique of an established theoretical framework in order to delineate the strategic separation of slow movement and degrowth. These are I keep on maintaining these, and all through I'll say these are different things, not to be confused with one another. So primarily what it leaves us with some of the foundational concepts such as the degrowth imperative, which is to establish a systematic compulsion for continuous growth, neoclassical growth models, employing a very contrasting framework that denies the compulsory nature of growth, setting the stage for a critic GDP as a very sole prosperity indicator. You have cyclical economic theories, which is utilized to illustrate the internal mechanisms, creative destructions, unemployment linkage that necessitate very institutional reliance and expansion. So, what does it really mean? What it primarily it creates kind of a very robust ecological economics framework that can be used to model the material and energy flows between society and nature, which is called social metabolism. Now, we can do a conceptual mapping by applying this multi-scale integrated analysis of social metabolism, the museum, and to illustrate the unsustainable nature of the current linear take and make dispose metabolism. Second is that we can do a very transformative pathway analysis. We can compare a structural policy implications of a lifestyle-oriented slow economy against a socio-political restructuring required by the full degrowth framework to determine which offers the more viable pathway for a systematic metabolic reversal. Now, if you can go to the next slide, this is where our primary discourse starts. And I'm sorry, I may bore you because till the time that if you really can see these two tables that I have created, you can compare one with the other. And then I see that, if you really can go through this. And this is actually a part of the book, which I take your kind permission to read out, which primarily talks about the social metabolism mirrors the health of the world. What you consume, we become. I repeat, social metabolism mirrors the health of our world. What we consume, we become. So it is claimed that the degrowth is not decline, but redesign. It makes us rethink prosperity as being over wealth and growth as harmony rather than excess. So in living with less, we find richness in connections, creativity, purpose. So many economists may be tempted to link the slow movement to degrowth, whereas the latter is a political, economic, and social movement encapsulated in a set of theories critiquing the paradigm of economic growth. So if we need to delink one from the other, we must know how to redefine the success by knowing when to say enough is enough, prioritizing sufficiency over excess. So it is beyond doubt that the capitalist economy is hurtling towards development imperatives. Hence, there is a crying need to reduce the global consumptions and productions, which we call social metabolism, and creation of a socially just, ecologically sustainable society with social and environmental well-being. A need to find a sustainable replacement of GDP as an indicator of prosperity, although the GDP is likely to shrink in a degrowth society. Society in which the objectives of a degrowth movement are achieved, this is not the primary objective of the degrowth. So the liberalization lies beyond the market, true, but the debate is where it is a slow economy or a degrowth that can pave the path to create a new ecosystem and escape from the cycles of the overproductions, overconsumptions by valuing care, culture, community, and commodities. I do not know how it would appeal to American Democrat coalition or a Republicans or a Tory or a Labour here, but I'm sure that each will understand in its own way. So degrowth highlights the importance of autonomy, care, self organizations, commons, community, open localisms, work sharing, happiness, and conviviality. I again say conviviality. However, the degrowth cannot be related to slow movement, as a former is opposed to the most forms of productivism. So the belief of the economic productivity and the growth is the purpose of human organization. So degrowth is fundamentally different from the green growth concepts. So if you go to the slide 7, which is slide 7, I'm either, sorry, you're on slide 7. Yeah. So that is about social metabolism. A key concept of the growth hints at slowing down consumerism. That is a set of flows of the materials and the energy that occur between nature and society, between different societies and within societies. So the flow of the social metabolism is a pulse of our collective well-being, just as the body transforms into food into lives. So society transforms resources into process, progress. Reversing the social metabolism involves transforming the way society consume, produce, interact with resources to foster sustainability and resilience. So it challenges the traditional linear model of resource extraction, use, and waste by advocating for more circular, regenerative practices. In cycle of the social metabolism, every action leaves a mark on the world we share. And there are many approaches societies can work towards reversing the social metabolism, creating systems that are more sustainable, equitable, resilient for future generations. The speed of the rhythm of the social metabolism shape the sustainability of our future. Instead, the traditional take, make, dispose approach, as I keep on saying all through this presentation, that reverse the social metabolism promotes circular consumptions, where products are designed for longevity, rescue, and recycling. This reduces waste and minimizes the environmental impact. By focusing on the efficient use of the resources and reducing waste, societies can reverse their social metabolism. This includes adapting sustainable practices in production, consumptions, and waste management to ensure that resources are used responsibly. Emphasizing regenerative practices means restoring and enhancing natural ecosystem rather than depleting them. This approach supports the practices like regenerative agriculture, which improves soil health, biodiversity, counteracting the depletions of the natural resources. Strengthening local economies through community-based initiatives, reducing reliance on the global supply chains can reverse social metabolism. The shift supports the local production, reduces transportation emissions, and fosters more resilient communities. Encouraging consumers to make informed choices that prioritize sustainability, ethical practices, helps to reverse the negative impact of the traditional consumption patterns. This includes supporting business that prioritizes environmental and social responsibility. So raising awareness about this impact, consumptions, and the production habits helps drive the transitions towards more sustainable practices. So education empowers individuals and communities to adopt the behaviors and that support a more circular, regenerative social metabolism. Government can play a circular role in reversing the social metabolism by implementing policies, regulations that promote sustainability. This includes incentivizing recycling, supporting green technologies, and enforcing environmental protection laws. I'm trying to reach out to the session chair. How much more time we have? So that I will.
No, almost 2 minutes, sir.
Oh, okay, all right.
Only.
So you almost on the close to the deathbed. All right. So
Yeah,
I try to go to the next slide, which is the slide 8. If you can have a look at the slide 8, which talks about where I will talk about the economic growth has been stimulated as an important economic policy goal for decades. So examples includes the growth duty in the British legislation, but also in the Canadian Jobs and Growth Act, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or the Euro Stability and Growth Pact 1997. So this has been criticized as politically adhering to a dogma or ideology by some critics of growth. So the theory of the political growth is imperative. On one hand, argues that the economic growth would be necessary to avoid the economic or social instability and to return the democratic legitimacy or to even guarantee the national security and international competitions. So if you go to the slide 9, I'm running through so that we can see this slide 9, which is where do we go from here in terms of the future direction, taking the research to a level that it is really understood. I would say that this particular applications, the multi-scale integrated analysis of social metabolism across specific national and regional economies. So this quantitative work would be precisely a model. The right-wing government unfortunately understand quantitative work more than the qualitative. Precisely a model that required reduction in material and energy throughout necessary to achieve the ecological safety margins, providing actionable targets for policymakers. Second is that structural policy modelings must also be focused on, which stimulates a very planned and managed degrowth transitions. Third is the comparative case studies versus a slow versus degrowth. So that confusion can be avoided, which I mentioned to you. We can conduct a comparative and longitudinal case studies of communities and municipalities that can be adopted for slow movement policies versus those who have implemented specific degrowth policies like local currency initiatives, resource capitalizations, etc., would provide a very empirical evidence to respective impact of each approach. And finally, the cultural acceptance of the studies must happen because we must explore the sociological and psychological factors influencing the cultural acceptance of sufficiency and the anti-productivist ethics, particularly in high-income economies, to better understand the practical political hurdles to systemic transformations. My final slide, and this is where we must conclude now, that the slow movement serves as a very vital cultural precursor by promoting the individual shifts towards an intentionality and reduced consumption. It is fundamentally inadequate as a solution to the global ecological crisis currently. So we must provide definite evidence that pursuit of a degrowth is not merely a lifestyle option, but a political and economic necessity driven by the inherent system of the growth imperative and unsustainable trajectory of the social metabolism. So by synthesizing these critics, so we can conclude that the current economic architecture is fundamentally unstable, relying on the growth that is both ecologically destructive and cyclically vulnerable. So the reliance of GDP makes economic contractions socially untenable. So hence I would advocate for a separation of the conjoined twins, which is the title of my research. The degrowth must be recognized as a distinct, comprehensive framework demanding planned structural contraction of the material throughput. The viability of a sustainable and just future hinges not merely slowing down, but on a very radical social redesign that replaces the pursuit of excess wealth with the prioritizations of sufficiency, conviviality, and ecological integrity, thereby successfully reversing the disastrous flow of the social metabolism. So this systematic restructuring, though politically challenging, is the only pathway to a long-term resilience. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening to me, but I'm ready to take any questions in case you have.